Welcome back to Functional Wellness with Dr. Alison. I'm so glad that you're here today. We are diving into chronic fatigue and specifically the muscle fatigue, joint pain, as well as brain fog. We're talking about post-exertional malaise, the full spectrum of what it means to live in a body that seems to be working against you. So whether you're dealing with ME/CFS, long COVID, autoimmunity, or something that just doesn't have a clear label yet, this episode is for you. So let me start by mapping out the spectrum because not all fatigue is created equal. On one end, I have what we would call physiological fatigue, normal fatigue. You go to the gym after a month off, you spend the weekend shoveling snow or moving furniture, you wake up the next day feeling sore or stiff, maybe you're walking a little funny, you can't go up the stairs. This is what we call DOMS, right? Your muscles are talking to you, it's normal, it's expected. Give it 2 or 3 days, keep moving gently, hydrate, and it resolves on its own. And this is very different from chronic fatigue. Then we have the middle ground, where the soreness doesn't fully resolve or where your recovery time starts to stretch a little longer than it should. Maybe you feel run down for a week after a busy weekend. You notice that your energy just isn't bouncing back like it used to. You might go, oh, this is part of getting old, or maybe it's just perimenopause. But really, we need to start paying attention because this is often the sign of something deeper going on and potentially harmful for the rest of your life. And we need to be on top of it now. And then we have the far end of the spectrum. And this is where I want to spend most of our time today. This is the fatigue where physically moving feels like you're moving through water, where your muscles are so exhausted that chewing food becomes an effort, where getting from your bed to the bathroom leaves you breathless, maybe dizzy, heart rate really high. So when you wake up in the morning feeling like you didn't sleep at all, like your body ran a marathon while you were lying still, and then you have to get up and do it all over again, this is a fatigue carried with joint pain. That deep bone level aching that doesn't resolve with rest or Advil. It's a spinal stiffness, the neck and shoulder tension that's sometimes called coat hanger pain because that's exactly where it sits and how heavy and painful it is. It's the brain fog, the cognitive heaviness where you can't find your words, follow a thought, have a conversation, can't even read a book. Maybe even driving becomes exhausting for you. And this is medically known as malaise, and specifically post-exertional malaise, or PEM. In my house, I just call it the PEMS, not the DOMS, because it's not just being tired after an activity. It's not just like, wow, that was a really great workout, and I'm really proud of myself, and my muscles, I'm going to be so swollen and stacked. No, this is something totally different. It's a whole body worsening of symptoms. And usually it begins almost immediately after exertion, or it can be delayed by a few hours. Like, oh, we had such a great time going out with friends, and we kind of ride that dopamine, oxytocin high for a while, but it will at some point come back down. So that activity that triggers this does not have to be exercise. It can be a grocery run. It could be a long conversation or even a triggering one. It can be an afternoon in a museum or a full day visiting family. You can come home and then you crash and you don't recover in a day or two. Sometimes it takes a week, sometimes longer. And now the conditions that live on this end of the spectrum is also really important, and understanding the language really matters. So the ME and ME/CFS stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis. Myalgic meaning muscle pain, and encephalomyelitis refers to the inflammation of the brain and the spinal cord. So ME/CFS is classified as a neurological disease, and it's important to say it's not a lifestyle problem. This isn't laziness, and it's not imaginary. We can see measurable disruptions in the nervous system and the immune system. So research describes this as a complex multi-system neurological disease with evidence of neuroinflammation. And then we have CFS, or chronic fatigue syndrome. These terms are often used interchangeably, but they are technically different. So CFS is primarily diagnosed around the symptom of profound, unexplained fatigue, usually accompanied by at least 4 additional symptoms such as poor sleep, memory issues, headaches, sore throat, and usually lasting 6 months or more. ME has a narrower definition, having more to do with the post-exertional malaise, but also the brain health and nerve function. Now, both exist together, which is why they're labeled together, and frequently show up in people who have a history of viral infections, autoimmune conditions, or even significant environmental exposures like mold. Women are diagnosed with this between 1.5 to 4 times more often than men, and research consistently shows that women also tend to experience more severe symptoms and a greater number of co-occurring conditions, meaning you could have ME/CFS with asthma, with insulin resistance, with hypothyroid. And that's not a coincidence. That's paying attention to a pattern. So how do we know if what you're experiencing falls into this category? First, you know because you cannot function the way a healthy person can. You're not the way you used to, and definitely not the way people around you do. So you already know that there's a difference in your function levels. So I'll use myself as an example. Last year, we went out for my son's birthday. We did what I think everyone would call a normal basic day. We went to the zoo, we had dinner out, we spent time together, and I came home and everybody else just went on with their lives. And I ended up in bed with a low-grade fever. My brain wasn't fine. I couldn't read. I couldn't leave my bed for a few days. So, thank God we planned the weekend around it for rest, but that's not normal. That's not a recovery from a good day. That's not needing a little side nap. That is post-exertional malaise. And I often ask my patients a very revealing question, which I love to ask because people are surprised that it's so common. But do you wake up in the morning feeling hungover, like you had the party of your life the night before, even though you're not drinking alcohol or consuming any substances? And if your answer is yes, then we need to talk about what's happening in your immune system, your nervous system, and your brain inflammation. This is often the fingerprint of autoimmunity and dysregulation. So when we talk about testing, it can be one of the most frustrating parts of navigating these conditions because currently there's not a single confirmatory lab test for post-exertional malaise, fibromyalgia, CFS. Diagnosis is clinical, meaning that it's built from your symptoms, your history, and the process of ruling out other causes. For ME/CFS specifically, diagnosis requires symptoms to be present for at least 6 months, including a reduction in your ability to function, so your activities of daily living. It means you have post-exertional malaise, sleep issues, brain health changes, memory changes, or orthostatic intolerance, which means like POTS, heart rate changes, blood pressure changes. So there's no blood test that says, yes, this is ME, this is PEMS, this is what it is. But we do have genetic testing now that can offer insight into specific genes that are linked to PEMS as well as immune regulation, and that can absolutely be part of the picture and at least a diagnostic criteria. An MRI can sometimes show changes in brain tissue or inflammation. We can use a tilt table test to diagnose POTS component that accompanies these issues. And then a sleep study is also really important because disordered sleep is both a symptom and a driver. It's obviously not necessarily a root cause of PEMS, but it can be a root cause of, general fatigue for sure. So for fibromyalgia, diagnosis involves like pressure point sensitivity and meeting specific clinical and symptomatic criteria, but again, no blood test. So I'm kind of hoping in the future we're going to see options like muscle biopsy or targeted metabolic testing for mitochondrial or cellular health, but we don't have that. And honestly, a biopsy is so invasive and painful and probably very unnecessary, but that's probably something in there that we'd be able to see. What we can test for and what we should test for are the root causes that drive or worsen these conditions. We need to look at iron and ferritin. We need to look at thyroid function. We need to look at the CBC, complete blood count. We need to look at inflammatory markers like CRP and cytokines. We need to check in on viral loads like Epstein-Barr and COVID antibodies, autoimmune panels to see if the body's triggered, and even hormone levels. So these obviously don't diagnose PEMS or CFS, but they're going to tell us where the body is struggling and what we can actually support, especially if these things are the root causes of how you're feeling and it's not just CFS. So let's talk about what's actually happening in the body and some root causes. But once again, when you look this stuff up, like especially POTS, and you get on your average search engine, the first thing you're going to see is that POTS is a social contagion. CFS is psychological. People just need antidepressants. And if you struggle with this, you already know that this is not a psychological issue. It's not a deconditioning problem. If I hear deconditioning one more time, I'm going to get very upset, because this is not an issue of needing to exercise more or train harder or push through. This is a serious energy crisis and a metabolic crisis happening at the cellular level. And it stings when you're so tired. Like, it took all of your energy just to get to an appointment, and they just look at you like, well, just work out. You're like, I can't. I couldn't even get out of the car to get here. And the research does show that graded exercise therapy, so working out more, like building up a program, does not work for PEMS, ME, CFS, or long hauler condition, and it does make you worse. You already know that if you're dealing with this, but the research is there for us. So print that out and bring it with you to your next appointment, okay? So let's talk about what we do know that is happening. And research is pointing in several different directions simultaneously. And the honest answer is we just don't have a single agreed upon explanation. So some researchers and clinicians believe this is a fundamental neurological and nerve function issues. Others are focused on cellular energy and mitochondrial dysfunction, and the idea that the cells themselves cannot produce or utilize energy efficiently. Others are looking at genetics and who is predisposed to these patterns, and maybe it's just something innately built in. And then there are those who are still arguing it's psychological in origin, but we're not listening to them. So for anyone living with this, you already know that all of this is really complicated. And the nervous system is definitely involved. Emotions and stress response definitely affect how the body functions. But because this is not a psychological condition with physical symptoms as a side effect, it's a physiological condition that affects mental function. And that distinction is really important for how we treat it. So let's dive into viruses, because what's become undeniable, especially since COVID, is the connection between viral infections and these conditions. So we're seeing massive numbers of people develop symptoms of ME, CFS, post-exertional malaise, dysautonomia, especially following COVID infections. And this isn't new. Epstein-Barr virus has been linked to ME, CFS for decades, as well as autoimmunity, lupus, IBD, and research has shown abnormally elevated markers that are inflammatory, like cytokines, up to 3 years after an Epstein-Barr infection, which tells us something important. The immune system, for some people, does not just simply return to a baseline after infections. It stays in a state of activation. And the hardest part about this is we know that these viruses stay in our body. They hide in joints, they hide in cells, they hide in biofilm. So you absolutely can have reactivations. And it's not uncommon to have a COVID infection and then an Epstein-Barr reactivation alongside of that. We also see these patterns in people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, with lupus, with mixed connective tissue, or autoimmune conditions. And the common thread here, too, is immune dysregulation, where the immune system itself has lost the ability to regulate. We also see really important connections to oxygen saturation and delivery. So sometimes we see this coming from asthma or changes in the lung tissue after an infection and just the body not being able to absorb or inhale or exhale the way it needs to. We see it with sleep apnea, which is why sleep tests are really important. And then reduced oxygen delivery to the muscles and cells, which is what's creating this metabolic crisis that we see. And this is why iron and ferritin levels matter so much here. Not just whether you're technically anemic, but how is your body transporting and utilizing oxygen at a cellular level. Let's talk about the gut microbiome connection, because there's some interesting research coming out right now and over the past few years. And in 2023, 2 studies found that there were consistent and measurable differences in the gut microbiome, so the good bacteria of people with ME/CFS compared to healthy controls. They found that people with ME/CFS had abnormally low levels of key bacterium, which are bacteria responsible for producing butyrate. I'm going to butcher these words: Eubacterium rectale, rectale, and Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, prausnitzii. Those are the 2 bacteria that were focused in on being low. And butyrate, what they create, is a short-chain fatty acid. It is the primary energy source for the cells lining your gut. Butyrate provides up to 70% of the energy. So when that production drops, the gut lining suffers, immune system becomes dysregulated, and that ripple effect of energy loss moves throughout the entire body. Researchers also found that the less bacteria this person had, the more severe their fatigue tended to be. So we don't know if the gut changes are causing the fatigue, or if the fatigue is significant that it's changing the gut, or vice versa. Like what's the root cause? We don't know, but we do know that it changes how we approach treatment. And this is also where biofilm becomes relevant. Biofilm is a protective layer that harmful bacteria, yeast, viruses, mold uses to shield themselves in the gut, kind of like their little home that the immune system can't penetrate, and it can harbor the very microbes that were driving this immune dysregulation. It can block the effectiveness of any protocol you put in place if you don't address it, because it's literally blocking your ability to absorb, digest, and produce energy. So on that, I love to run PCR testing for active viral infections, especially Epstein-Barr, when you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired. What's going on? Is it my thyroid? Well, no, we need to run an actual test to see if it's active, but also an immune panel to understand the history of past infections, because that history shapes what's happening in your body right now. And I know that when I run these panels and people bring them to their specialists and they're like, look, Dr. Allison ran this. And usually the specialists say something like, okay, well, you have a history of it. It doesn't mean anything. Okay, you have a history of it, but what do you want me to do about it? And you know what? That's true. There's not a medical treatment for something like Epstein-Barr. Even when I had it active my first time in high school, it was, all right, don't go to school, rest, recover. It's going to take a long time, and that's it. So we're going to talk about what we're actually going to be able to do here in this segment coming up right now. So the first hardest step is knowing your limits. And that's why I want to start with this. How do we fix this? Well, we can't necessarily cure this, right? So what we do have to do is take care of ourselves. We have to stop overtraining. We have to stop overworking. We have to stop trying to outthink our body's capacity. And I'll tell you this, my mental state and my mental energy do not match what my body can actually sustain. So in my head, I wake up, I want to spend, so let's say the weekend. I want to spend the weekend, we'll deep clean, we'll get everything reset, all the laundry done. We'll have a nice, clean, sparkly house for focusing for the week. I want to go on a 5-mile hike. I want to go out with friends and have dinner. And I want to spend the next day feeling great and reading. And then my body goes, yeah, no, my body has a different vote. So like, do the dishes and lay down. Do the laundry carefully, usually sitting in bed, and take a rest. You know, I have patients who tell me like, oh, I washed all the floors, but then I had a nap for the rest of the day. And you know what? That's real. That's reality. And it's not weakness. It's the physiology of this condition. And we need to know our limits and honor them, not try to outsmart them, because you cannot outsmart the PEMS. So if you're planning a big day or a big weekend, or you have an event coming up, whether that means you're giving a presentation, you're going to a second store on your errand run, you're attending an event, build in the recovery time after. I don't care if it's washing the floor, if it's going to a friend's birthday party, dinner, if it's going to 2 grocery stations. That is your marathon. You are running a marathon, and not like your friend who actually literally runs a marathon and then lives life afterwards and can train and doesn't need as much rest as you, because it doesn't make it less real or less deserving of recovery. Okay. So know your body. And in knowing your body, we need to rule out those major contributing factors. So we need to get some blood work done. We need to rule out iron deficiency, hypothyroid, autoimmune conditions, sleep disorders. This is not optional. This is the foundation of your personalized plan, so you know what to do. In an ideal world, I would run a full viral load panel, a GI map stool test to look at your gut microbiome directly, and an organic acids test to assess how your cells and mitochondria are actually functioning. Probably a full hormone panel as well. Some people like to do a nutrition evaluation, but I just find they're so expensive, and it just comes back with the basics. So like, just take a multivitamin, it'll probably be covered. You probably won't glean a lot of information from that $600 panel. Like, let's spend it somewhere else. Because we want to build something specific to your body, not just a generic protocol from the internet like we're talking about. So let's talk about a generic protocol that you're listening to off the internet that might be able to help you. Okay. So let's start with diet. And I recommend a balanced ketogenic style diet for most people dealing with these conditions, because the goal is to shift your body towards burning fat for fuel, which reduces those glucose swings that drive inflammation, that drive brain fog, that drive fatigue. And keto actually supports hormone production and brain health and lowers inflammation there. I'd like you to add in MCT oil for some extra source of usable ketones for brain function, cellular energy. And honestly, this alone can make a huge difference in brain fog and that baseline fatigue. Now, for the gut health, and based off the research we just talked about, number one, butyrate supplementation is the first things I reach for. So supporting the short chain fatty acid production, or you'll see it as SCFA, that's likely depleted, is foundational. And then from there, we can layer in multi-strain probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. Now, for most people, I recommend a pulsing approach, meaning 7 days of probiotics followed by 7 days of antimicrobial. This helps break down the biofilm incrementally, so a little bit at a time, releasing all those trapped bacteria, yeast, bacteria, without creating a massive detox reaction. So if you've ever done a detox and like on day 3, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sick, I'm nauseous, I have diarrhea, I have a headache, I feel horrible, and then you feel better, that's releasing that biofilm. But you just don't do it. Your body's just not going to get rid of everything at one time. So that pulsing effect will help rebuild in the meantime, and we're chipping away at that protective fortress that the harmful microbes have built, but still giving your bacteria, good bacteria, the benefit of nutrition and care. Now, cellular support is where I tend to lean in and where I see the biggest differences in myself, but also my patients. But this is often where people get stuck trying to take like every single supplement, and then they're not seeing results, and their pantry is filled with like half-filled supplement bottles. And I get it, because same. So there's no single supplement that fixes mitochondrial dysfunction, but we do have combinations that can make a real difference, and you have to commit to them consistently. So as a baseline foundation, not knowing you, just listening to a podcast, I focus on NAD support, which is NMN for energy health, glutathione, B complex vitamins, targeted iron support, and sometimes, a lot of times, I'll throw in DHEA as well for hormone support. And I'll link my full script protocol here so you can see exactly what I use. Start from a place of quality and specificity rather than just guessing at the supplement aisle. You'll know you're getting great brands that work as well. You know, when I talk about multivitamin, I I go between doTERRA's VMG powder, which has been a game changer for me, and their collagen powder, which also has NMN in it and vitamin C and antioxidant support. That has been fantastic for energy health. But I also strongly recommend beef organ supplements as a nutrient-dense multivitamin foundation. So personally, I use Heart and Soil. It's heartandsoil.co, and start with their liver capsules. So that way you're going to absorb it better. And so many of my patients say that is, once we get them on the right track, that's usually the last thing they end up with and the only thing that they need because they're using it and everything's so much better. And they're not taking 100 supplements a day. They're just taking the organs. So it's awesome to get to that point. So let's talk about movement, because movement is still important. And I know that it feels impossible on these bad days. And I want to ask you to try and do 5 minutes. Can you stand up and just do some arm swings? Can you do some gentle stretching in bed? Can you just focus on some breath work? Maybe you hop on the vibration plate for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, something. Because we're not necessarily focused about building fitness and muscles and hitting PRs in the gym. It's about keeping your lymphatic system moving, keeping your joints lubricated, keeping your muscles from becoming completely frozen from not use, and just kind of in that vicious cycle, right? Like we're tired, so we don't move, then we get more tired. We need to break that up. And most of us have done physical therapy, and it does help, especially for our joints, reducing pain, getting that movement in. But it can also feel like running a marathon when we do too much. So can you break it down into 2 sessions? 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon. The goal is to find movement that does not push you into a crash, but keeps your body gently awake, right? So viral support is my next topic, and it gets very individualized. And I want to be thoughtful here because I typically start with nicotine patches for about 10 days because we know that it's going to kick the virus off of our nervous system and our cells. It's going to reduce that load. It's going to be anti-inflammatory. It is a nootropic for the brain. It offers neuroregulatory support. And you know I love talking about the research in those long COVID cases, and it's a great start. I also find really great results with homeopathic programs, particularly like the ones from Desbio that are designed around specific viral loads. So that way it helps rid the body of the infection and where it's living in the cells, probably the organs, as well as the joints, is where viruses like to hang out until they're reactivated. We do have nutritional antivirals like lysine and monolaurin, and elderberry can be layered in. But you know me, if you have an autoimmune condition, immune-stimulating herbs like lemon balm or reishi and shiitake mushrooms, those can actually worsen your symptoms based off of that overdrive through the Th1 or Th2 pathways. So you have to know yourself. You have to make sure you're not putting yourself into a flare, and you have to work with a practitioner who understands your specific immune picture and what your body needs and what drives your flares, okay? And the most important principle of this is build, don't sprint. Go low and slow. Make a few changes at a time, but build on them. So if you're going to change your diet for a week and then quit before you even get to gut support or cellular nutrition, you're not going to see those results. You're just not. So start with the change that feels most accessible, most sustainable, and then add to it. So think of it like building a house. You have to pour the foundation before you can put up the walls. And if you pour the foundation, you're like, this looks great, and then you break it down and try to build on top of that, you're not going to have anything good happen. Your house is going to fall apart. You need the structure. And this is a lot of information. I know it's overwhelming. There's lots and lots of ideas out there, just like with everything, especially chronic illness. You're going to see cold plunges and saunas and red lights and IVs and hyperbaric oxygen, like everything for everything. So do what you can. What can you do at home that's most important and is going to be most sustainable for you? So usually food and supplements, lowering your activity load and focusing in as much as you can on sleep. And then, of course, working with someone who can hold the complexity of your case, get the right testing done that's valuable to you that you can act on. So if you're ready to start that process, you can schedule with me online. Go to littleblackbagmedicine.com. I work virtually, so we can meet you wherever you are. And I would love to support and finding your next step with you. So thank you so much for being here today. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been struggling to find answers, please know that functional medicine is not giving up on you. The answers exist, the support exists, and I'm grateful that you're here taking care of you. Until next time, have a great day.